Hey, greetings everybody. It is GleeCon here again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. On our last one, we did some more Magic and Mayhem. I think we're pretty close to wrapping up that entire book. We got maybe one more, and then we'll move on to the next Dungeons and Dragons source material. On our last non-weird one, we looked at the Champions Arise, which sets the stage for us, for our characters in World of Warcraft. I did some research about each of the different patches and started planning out how we're going to tackle Classic. I'm not going to get too nuts and bolts with that right now, but suffice to say, we will read a couple more entries in Chronicles. We've also been reading Cycle of Hatred. On the 13th chapter, we basically just saw that D-bag. That's the Chamberlain for Jaina, just acting like a little jerk and setting some kindling that could potentially just burst into a big battle, a conflagration between the Alliance and the Horde. And I'm sure the Horde are doing their part too. So stay a while and listen as we continue that story with Chapter 14 of Cycle of Hatred. As Egwene told the story of how she was made guardian, Jaina found surprise piling upon shock. The histories she had read had always painted the appointment of Egwene in nothing but a positive light. The notion that the council was reluctant to appoint her, and did so despite misgivings about her sex, and that they would have resisted her methods so thoroughly, was completely alien to her. Of course, Egwene's memories of those days were several centuries old. Your account of matters does not match what is in the history scrolls, Magna. No, Egwene said with a sigh, it wouldn't. Better to let you young mages think that all was its function in perfect harmony. You might learn from their lack of example. She shook her head and slumped a bit farther in her seat. But no, they didn't want a girl there, and only appointed me because they didn't have a choice. I was the best qualified, certainly more than the other four, and they regretted it every minute. She sat back up straight. In the end, we all did. It wasn't for me. Jaina shook her head. That's ridiculous. You did so much. What did I do? I insisted that Triss will be more proactive in dealing with the demons, but what did my insistence accomplish exactly? For 8 centuries I tried to stem the tide, to no avail. Zmordor was just the first. So many demons, so many battles, and in the end I was still tricked by Sargeras. This time Jaina didn't need to hear the story. I know what happened to you when you faced Sargeras. You destroyed his physical form, but his soul remained inside you, and was passed on to Medivh. Chuckling bitterly, Egwene said, And you still think I was a great wizard? And let my arrogance interfere with my judgment. I assumed the Tirsfallen to be a group of hidebound old fools, rather than what they truly were, experienced mages who knew better than me. After I defeated Sargeras, I became more arrogant, if that's even possible. I ignored every summons the council sent me, disregarded their procedures, disobeyed their orders. After all, I beat Sargeras, and he was a god, so what did they know? She snarled. I was such an idiot. Don't be ridiculous. Jaina couldn't believe this. Bad enough that the greatest wizard of her time, the woman she'd idolized all her life, turned out to be such an unpleasant person, but now she was just being idiotic. It was Sargeras. Any mage would have made the same mistake you did. As you said, he was a god. He knew he would have to trick you because of your power, and he knew how to manipulate you. What you did was perfectly natural. Egwene stared at one of the 2 corners of the ramshackle hut that she apparently called home. I did far, far more than that. There was also Medivh. Now Jaina was even more confused. I knew Medivh, Magna. He was whirling to look at Jaina. Egwene snapped. I'm not talking about what my son was. I'm talking about how he was. What do you mean? Jaina asked, genuinely confused. Medivh was fathered by Nielis Aran, and... Fathered? Egwene let out a noise that sounded like a rock shattering. That's far too generous a term for it. 69 years ago. The summons had been insistent this time, which was the only reason why Egwene responded to it. The guardians of Tirisfal had changed over the years. The 3 elves were the same, but the humans and the gnome had all died and been replaced, and then their replacements died and themselves had successors. In many ways, though, they had not changed at all. Rather than deal with them in any way or deal with an apprentice, Egwene had used her magics to extend her life so she could continue to do her duty as guardian. She had almost fallen to her death while standing on a parapet in Lordaeron, casting a seeker spell for one of Sargeras's former thralls, rumored to be out and about in the city. In the midst of the incantation, the council had decided to hit her with a summons so powerful that she almost lost her balance. It was the third summons in as many days, and the first that had interfered with her ability to function. Realizing that she would not hear the end of it until she answered, she teleported to the Tirisfal glade. She stood on top of the very rock Falric, who had also long since died, as had her other 3 fellow apprentices, all perishing while fighting demons, had transmuted into fool's gold all those centuries ago, time having exposed and tarnished it so it was a dull brown instead of the bright golden color it was 800 years past. "What is it that's so important that you interrupt my work?" "It has been 8 centuries, Egwene," one of the new humans said. Egwene had never bothered to learn his name. "It is past time you relinquished your duties." Drawing herself up to her full height, which made her taller than any of the men surrounding her in this glade, she said, "I am properly addressed as Magna. That's one of those ridiculous rules you insist on foisting upon the magical world." The word was a dwarven one, meaning protector, and had been the honorific for every guardian since the first. Egwene didn't care much for titles, but the council's insistence on the rules and regulations and their disapproval of her flaunting them made her sensitive to their own violations. Relfthra threw it back in her face. "Ah, so now you're a stickler for rules, eh?" The human gave Relfthra a look and then said, "The point, Magna, is that you know as well as any of us the risks of what you are doing. The longer you extend your age, the greater the risk that it will be undone. The de-aging magics are not precise, nor are they stable. In mid-conflict and mid-casting, you could find yourself suddenly brought to your natural age. If that happens without a successor—" Egwene held up a hand. The last thing she needed from these fools was a lecture on the very ways of magic. She was a stronger magician than any of them. Had they faced down Sargeras himself? "Very well. I will find a successor and transfer the guardian power to that person." Gritting his teeth, the human said, "We will choose the successor, just as we chose Skevel's and that of every guardian before him." "No, I shall make the choice. I believe I know better than anyone what is involved in being a guardian. Certainly more than you who stand around this glade and make pronouncements while the rest of us do the actual work." "Magna," the human started, but Egwene wished to hear no more. "I have heard your advice, and for once it is worth heeding," she smiled. "I suppose it was bound to happen eventually. Even a village idiot may stumble upon a valuable philosophy once in a while. When my successor is chosen, you will be informed. That is all." Without waiting to be dismissed, she teleported back to the parapet. While the council's words were in fact true, she was in the midst of doing her duty. She once again cast the Seeker spell to determine if the demon was loose in Lordaeron, as rumored. Once that was taken care of, there was no demon, only some teenagers indulging in magics they didn't understand. Had they continued, that demon would have been summoned, but Egwene was able to forestall their adolescent efforts. She traveled to Stormwind, specifically to the home of Nielis Aran. Aran had been an admirer of hers for many years. Egwene barely paid any attention to him, except insofar as he was more talented than most of the mages who were part of the Tirisfal. He was blissfully free of the prejudices of the council and had done well by his craft, serving also as the court magician for King Landon Rin. Were she several centuries younger, she might have admired his steel blue eyes and his broad shoulders and his easy laugh. Landon Rin. However, she wasn't several centuries younger, and so had neither interest in him nor desire to even acknowledge his interest in her. She'd had plenty of dalliances in her younger days, starting with Jonas, but she'd long since lost patience with them. 800 years of life had exposed romance to be a mass of fallacy and artifice, and she had neither the time nor the inclination for it. Still in all, she managed to dredge up the flirtatiousness that she had first used on Jonas as a teenager, and started speaking to Aran. She suddenly became fascinated in his hobbies and his interest in dwarven music. All of it served one purpose, which was for him to share his bed with her. The next morning, she knew that she had been impregnated by his seed. She had been mildly disheartened to realize that the embryo within her would grow to be a male child. She had been hoping for a daughter, as yet another poke in the eye to the guardians of Tirisfal, but even so, this boy would serve the purpose for which he had been conceived. That's not how they, in the other books that we've read, like The Last Guardian, that's not how they portray her relationship with him at all. Like, She actually kind of cared for him. They're cheapening and making her a lot more crass in this book. They've done taken a lot of liberties with emphasizing the sex disparities, gender power dynamics, which on the one hand, sure, that paints some realism, I guess. It's more accurate to probably what would have occurred in a setting like that. But on the other hand, it takes away part of the charm of World of Warcraft, which is that males and females are just as powerful as one another. Even if they're glossing over the power imbalances in the process of creating that. Taking her leave of a rather disappointed Iran, who truly had expected little else, but had been hoping that Egwene could at least have been polite about it, she departed Stormwind. For 9 months she performed her tasks as guardian as much as she could, and eventually bore Medivh. Only then did she return, handing the infant to Iran and declaring him to be her heir. I can see by the look on your face that you're horrified. Egwene said the words to Jaina with a vicious smile. I am. Jaina spoke true. She had fought alongside Medivh. It was he who had encouraged Jaina to ally herself with Thrall and the Orcs against the Burning Legion. But she'd had no idea that the Prophet's origins were so tawdry. Indeed, she knew very little about him, save that he had returned from the dead and was trying to atone for his sins by doing everything he could to stop the Burning Legion. That is why I told you the story, Egwene said. I'm no hero. I'm no role model. I'm no shining beacon to inspire wizards of any sex. What I am is an arrogant ass who let her power and the wiles of a clever demon destroy her, and the rest of the world. Jaina shook her head. She remembered many conversations with Kristoff about how the lessons of history are rarely in the written word, for such accounts were invariably biased in favor of what the writer wished the reader to know about. She realized that the histories she had read about the guardians of Tirisfal in Antonidas' library were as vulnerable to such biases as the historical texts that Kristoff had spoken of. Then suddenly a feeling pricked at the back of Jaina's neck. She stood up. So did Egwene. No doubt the old woman felt the same thing. She confirmed it by saying, the wards are back up. Jaina found it interesting that Egwene felt that, especially given Jaina's own ability to break down the wards without her knowledge. It confirmed a growing suspicion of hers. Of greater concern, however, was that these wards felt far more powerful and had entirely the wrong feeling. Something is wrong. Yes, I know this magic. Never thought I'd encounter it again, to be honest. Egwene made a noise. In fact, I'm not really sure how it's possible. Before asking Egwene to explain herself, Jaina had to make sure she could penetrate the wards. She attempted a teleport spell, this time adding a ward penetration incantation to the mix, bracing herself for the ensuing pain should it not succeed. Sure enough, it didn't. It would have worked previously. She hadn't used the penetration spell to teleport the thunder lizards, only because she needed to investigate the highlands before bringing hundreds of agitated animals there. Closing her eyes briefly to block out the pain, she turned to Egwene. I can't get through them. I was afraid of that, Egwene sighed, apparently not relishing being stuck with the little girl. Jaina wasn't entirely thrilled with the prospect either, but more because she couldn't fulfill her promise to Thrall while trapped in these highlands. You said you knew this magic. Egwene nodded. Yes, remember Smodbord, the first demon I encountered? The one who imprisoned those school children? Jaina nodded. These wards are his. I guess because you can't truly kill a demon unless they're in the actual twisting nether, or whatever plane they come from. All right, cool. So we have another episode of Cycle of Hatred and Lore of Warcraft all wrapped up. I appreciate you so much for listening and viewing. I hope you enjoyed it. This one in the pipe. 5 by 5.